What's up, everybody, and welcome back to part two here of Karen Read's 18th day of trial, where we're going to jump into this blood alcohol content, the extrapolation, whether or not it's legit, whether or not a reasonable jury could agree or disagree with some of the testimony that came out about it. It's really interesting, and it's like very, very common testimony and scientific testimony that's used in so many cases across the country. So we're going to go through that. We're going to go through the last couple witnesses as well, answer your questions. And this will probably be our last video for Karen Read for this week, because as you know, they're done with court. So let's get into it. Let's discuss it. Let's get to your questions. Here we go. So the first witness we're going to get to is the pathologist from the hospital. We're going to skip a lot of the beginning background stuff. This is one of those witnesses that makes me think I'm glad I don't stream a trial live, because I did not want to listen to all of it. But one of the parts we are going to listen to, which I found very interesting, okay, and this is somebody that people have said, the judge is very pro-prosecution and anti-defense. Well, she went kind of hard at this witness a couple times, and it's not good. If this is a witness that you call and it's somewhat of an expert witness, and they look to the jury or in front of the jury like somebody the judge thinks is annoying or frustrating, or gets annoyed at or frustrated at because they can't keep their voice up. And that's something she admonished him on multiple times. I think I get it. We have to be able to hear it. The court reporter needs to be able to hear it. The stream needs to be able to hear it. And of course, most importantly, the jury needs to be able to hear it. So I get why she kept telling him to do that. But I did think that it was a little harsh at times. And this was a prosecution witness. So I thought that was kind of interesting to me that she did that. And we're going to listen to a couple of those to start. And then we're going to get into the important stuff that he testified to.
Drawn by the phlebotomist, and then what happens from there as far as the testing?
Okay, so
before you do that, doctor, so we might have to turn off the fans, which we don't want to do. I really need you to keep your voice up so that the court officer over there, so that folks down there can hear you.
okay, so at Good Samaritan, I can go through the process. The doctor will order the test in the emergency room. We have two phlebotomists down in the emergency room. That test will print out, the order will print out down in the emergency room, and it will print out a label for the blood tube. It will print out on that label the color of the blood tube to be ordered, and will also print out what on the label what is to be tested in our lab. So that order will be seen by our phlebotomists in the emergency room. They will then locate the patient and perform the veni puncture or the blood draw, and use the correct tube. They'll go through the process of one of the most important processes in testing somebody's blood is accurate patient identification. So within our policy, we ask the patient to state his or her name, first and last name and date of birth. We have them say it out loud to make sure we have two forms of identification. Once that's confirmed, there's also a bracelet on the patient, so we'll match it up with a Good Samaritan ID number. So the first step is to make sure we have the correct patient. So then the phlebotomist has the order in front of her or him, and uses the correct tube. Before drawing, they have to find the correct vein, a good vein for the patient, which is usually in the forearm antecubital fossa area. They will find that vein. They will cleanse the area with a non-alcohol swab, which in this case the order was for alcohol.
All right, so doctor, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop you. I think part of it is that you're saying so much and your voice is fine, and then it drops, and it's fine, and then it drops. So Paul, can we turn the fans off, please? It's important that all the jurors hear everything you say, doctor.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so but speak into the
I'm
microphone.
going to bring it really close.
All right, this should be better with
hopefully you can turn it back on when I get better at this.
I mean, literally, the guy is apologizing. I kind of feel bad for him. Everybody's ticked if you have to turn the AC off. I'd be ticked if I was a juror. I'm naturally just sweating and just sitting there hot anyways. So not great. Very clear. And she gave him like lots of warnings. I felt like I could hear him fine. Maybe it sounds different in the courtroom, but holy cow. It's like, eesh. And I mean, I felt bad for him. I feel like he kind of handled it the best that he could. But once again, she has to turn the air off and just wait to if you think she's annoyed until we hear her start with the next witness. And what she says about having to turn the air off and how everybody feels about that. We are going to jump ahead a little bit and discuss how the blood draw went, what the legal limit is, how they do it in the hospital, how they test it, and we'll get into how defense attorneys attack this, how prosecutors may be able to use it, and what the different ways jurors can look at this are.
reporting alcohol, in serum or plasma, and we're not in the business of the legal aspects of alcohol testing, because alcohol, what I understand is the alcohol legal limit in Massachusetts is 0.08 grams per deciliter. We don't make any conversions in a hospital. We're not in that business to do that. We just report on the serum percentage or the plasma level, and we don't make any attempts to do any official conversion to a whole blood level. If we did, we'd have to validate, we'd have to do many studies, and we're just not in the business for that.
And I understand that's not how it's reported within your record or at the facility. What my question is, are you aware of a process by which you can sort of then mathematically convert from milligrams per deciliter to a gram?
I am aware of that. Recently, I had to read about it, but up until recently, I was not aware. So I'm not in that. We're not in the business for whole blood. But there is a formula. I do know about it.
He says, okay, and again, kind of discredits his testimony a little bit if you want to look at it that way, that they're not in the business of the forensic, legal medical stuff. They're just doing it at the hospital to treat patients and to understand what's going on with their blood. They're also not in the business of doing and testing whole blood, instead just the serum or the plasma. We're going to hear a lot about this, okay? To simplify it for you. And what's really funny is when I have experts and they'll go through stuff like this with me sometimes. And, I've had not an expert quite like this guy, but kind of like the next guy, extrapolation experts we've had in DUI trials in the past. And, we'll talk more about that when we get to him. But I'm always like, okay, and I'll repeat it back to them in like the dumbest terms I can. It's like, so here's the difference between whole blood and plasma. The blood alcohol content is higher in plasma than it is in whole blood, right? So if we're talking about whole blood and some people think that that's more reliable, you can convert it, right? So what's the conversion? If it's 0.93 in whole blood, what is it in plasma? What is it in whole blood? Just simplify it. It's a little higher in plasma than it is in whole blood. Simplify it so the jury gets, okay, so the whole blood number, which is the more reliable number, is what? As opposed to all this stuff about spinning it in the tube and how we test it and what it comes out to and all this stuff. I feel like they made it incredibly complicated when they really didn't have to. I get that you want it to be scientific. I get that you want the jury to understand and be able to hear, oh, wow, this guy seems really smart. I've got to listen to him. He's got to tell me what it is because I'm not going to be able to figure it out on my own. I get sometimes wanting to do that. But in my opinion, I think you can simplify it. I think you can dumb it down. And I don't mean dumb it down to the jury. Dumb it down for me, the lawyer who has to explain this to a jury, right? And if you want to have them do all the scientific mumbo jumbo first, fine. But at the end, you got to have them simplify it. If one wants to convert a whole a serum or a plasma level to a whole blood, there are formulas that basically you need to. It's a simple formula, but there's varying opinions on which formula can be used.
Now, as far as this specific patient, the defendant, Ms. Reed, do you have any sense from the chart in front of you as far as sort of the timeline of when the blood was drawn to when it was tested and reported and things of that nature?
I think it was the order was 9:03 in the morning.
I heard some different people talking about when the blood was taken versus when it was tested. So we're going to listen to him describe the timeline. Blood was taken at 9:03. Okay. That's going to be important. We're going to discuss that a lot in this video. Blood was taken at 9:03. Commonwealth's timeline is she hit John O'Keefe at 12:45. So 8.5-ish hours later is when the blood was drawn and when it was tested. Now, from when it was drawn to when it was tested, pretty quick. He's going to go through that. But the important block of time is that 8 or 9 hours in between.
Minutes later, the phlebotomist, it happened pretty fast. 5 minutes later, the phlebotomist got the labels printed. Then 5 minutes after that, they went in and drew it. It was very quickly. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but ultimately it was received in our lab, I think, 10 minutes after the order, the blood, very quickly. And then the final result, when the alcohol level was reported in the computer system, was, I think, 50 minutes from the time of the order.
Mayor, Coach?
Yes.
That was 93 milligrams per deciliter, is that correct?
Correct.
So when they tested the serum at the hospital, it was 93 milligrams per deciliter. Is that what it is? I don't know. I wrote it down here. To put it in terms that people understand, we all know most of America, I think everywhere, but I'm not sure. I'll just say in Massachusetts, just like it is in Florida, 0.08 is the legal limit. Okay. So 93 milligrams per deciliter is 0.093, which again, I thought this was a miss by Lally and the expert to not say it in the same terms so that people could understand immediately, but saying 0.08 versus 93 milligrams per deciliter. And there's ways you can do conversions and all this stuff. It's like, it's that, hangover GIF where it's like all the numbers going around in Zach Galifianakis' head when he's, counting cards. But I just feel like you're making it more complicated than it needs to be. Do the conversions, use similar numbers in the same way. Everybody knows a 0.08, right? Everybody's heard that. 0.08 is the legal limit. So let's just use those terms, that terminology that a jury can understand, especially if we want her, if we're trying to prove that she was drunk, use that terminology. All these hours later, still drunk, all these hours later, still above a 0.08, something like that could be a good question Lally could ask this witness. I thought, again, personalize him, make it easier for the jury to understand. I think there was a miss here for that.
Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination?
And that's what he ends on, the 0.093, still above the legal limit. And again, the next witness is going to kind of connect the dots for the Commonwealth, but let's listen to the cross here.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You testified that hospitals are not in the legal business of calculating VACs. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes,
And you'd agree that there are differences between screening tests that are conducted at hospitals and forensic tests that are done in labs, correct?
correct.
And the purpose of testing
Again,
is
she caught on right to the same thing I felt like, where he almost discredited his own testimony, saying, the hospitals are very different than forensic. We're not thinking about the case. We're not thinking about litigation or legal stuff. But when you call legal experts, that's exactly what they're doing. They're focusing on the legal stuff. They're going to explain how it fits into the legal world. This guy was not trying to do that. To his credit, that's the truth. And the defense attorneys are going to highlight that, obviously.
the clinical setting at a hospital is to assist in the quick diagnosis and treatment of a patient. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And so your priorities may be different than those if you're at a forensic lab where the goal is to ensure accuracy and reliability at all costs, correct?
I don't agree. Not correct.
Well, hospitals use serum tests to screen for the presence of alcohol, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree that serum testing does not measure alcohol directly, but it actually measures the presence of NADH.
Correct.
And NADH is the byproduct that's created when the body breaks down alcohol.
Correct.
And the reason
And so
hospitals
she is, while scientifically correct, I'm not trying to take anything away from that, trying to complicate it even more, right? And bring the credibility down even more. It's like, so you don't even use the whole blood, you use the serum. Less reliable, it's always higher there. You're not even testing for actual alcohol, you're testing for this that's in alcohol or how the body breaks down. So making it even more complicated and more like, if I'm the jury, it's like, am I really going to rely on this? Or does this just seem even more complicated than it's worth? The vast majority of people that I heard, you know, in the chats on Twitter, in my DMs yesterday was, this was too complicated. I didn't really follow this guy. I really liked the next witness personally. This guy was a little more difficult to follow for me personally.
use a serum test rather than a whole blood test is because it's quick and efficient and you can get test results within 20-ish minutes. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, correct.
And you'd agree that NADH, which is what serum essentially tests for, can also be elevated by factors other than alcohol in the blood.
I'm not aware of that.
Are you familiar? Are you familiar with any medical literature that has found that NADH is created when the body has elevated either lactate or LDH in the system?
Correct. There are some issues, in our policy. There are some factors that can lead to falsely elevated or falsely lowered serum alcohol. One is lactic acid or LDH. Another one is Walden's.
So you don't like to hear that if you're the Commonwealth. There are some things that can artificially elevate these numbers. And is that important if somebody blows a 0.29 or if their blood alcohol content is a 0.29? Maybe not important to think about those other minor factors. But when it's a 0.093, when the legal limit is 0.08, I'm going to bring you a lot of real life experience and thought, because I talked to some of the lawyers in my firm as well today, and some of my buddies, talked to a lot of prosecutors who spent a lot of time prosecuting DUIs. Different than this case, DUI death, much more serious, second degree in here, manslaughter in here. But at the point, proving DUI, it's the same. And this is like the same evidence, blood or breath, alcohol content used in I'm not going to say all DUI cases because people refuse, but in most DUI cases, you have evidence like this. So I've taken a pretty good poll, and it is unanimous. There are no differences from any of the current or former prosecutors I talked to, all in Florida, not in Massachusetts, but all in Florida, prosecuting this exact type of case or this exact type of evidence.
Crohn's macroglobulinemia, which is a hematological problem, and other things that can interfere with not just any test, or lipids, high levels of lipids, or hemolysis, or high levels of bilirubin. But our machines are very sophisticated now. If there are any elevations of, let's say, hemolysis or lipids or bilirubin, the Roche machines will detect that and flag it as a possible interference, or it won't even let us resolve the test.
So, Wicked Pissa. Yes or no questions are perfect for this guy. Honestly, I don't know if this was her plan, but the defense attorney in this situation asking him these open-ended questions again is almost making my eyes glaze over again. And the jury doesn't have the opportunity to pause it and read funny names like this. So they're just listening to this guy go and drone on and on. So is he proving anything with his explanations? Or is the jury being like, I don't get what this guy's talking about?
So with any test, there can be interferences, and I'm sure there can be interferences with the forensic way of testing as well.
He's like, yeah, there are issues with the way the hospital does it, but there are also issues with the way the forensic testing does it. It's like, okay, so all of it has issues. All of it has reasonable doubt. We can't really believe any of it. That doesn't help the Commonwealth.
There are other causes of high levels of LDH and therefore NADH also include things like trauma, muscle weakness and loss of muscle tissue, or abnormal tissue formation. Is that correct? Have you read studies about that?
I haven't read those studies, no.
Would you agree that there may be other sort of medical stressors or things that can't necessarily be captured by the technology, but that could cause error in testing?
I don't understand that question.
Well, you testified that there can be certain errors in testing. That's something that we see throughout all different types of sort of scientific literature, which includes ethanol testing.
Yep.
And there are certain sort of factors that could cause a higher level of NADH that might not necessarily be picked up by the machines that you use in the hospital. Is that correct?
I am not familiar. If there is, it's not not a common phenomenon. Our methodology for doing many tests are based on this NADH enzyme methodology, and we've never had issues with it. I read a lot. I haven't read about major faults of our methodology for testing. Most hospitals, when we look at when we actually have to do proficiency testing with any test that we do in a hospital. So 3 times a year we get sent unknown levels of alcohol and 5 samples.
This is my daily reminder that you can hit this and you can slow down the speed if you want to by hitting playback speed on your video that you are watching if it's too fast.
To be accurate 3 times a year, and we're able to look at not only our results, make sure they're correct, but we're able to look at how what other hospitals are doing across the nation. So when I last looked, and it's held true for over 10 years, maybe 20 years, is that of the, I think, 5,000 hospitals that are testing for alcohol, it's over 80% of them are using our methodology, which is the alcohol dehydrogenase and NADH. And I can't imagine if why if there were any major issues with alcohol testing using that methodology, why would it wouldn't be that high of a.
As you testified, the goal in a clinical setting, obviously, is to test for the presence of alcohol, but you're not in the business of trying to sort of calculate BAC, correct?
No, we don't.
So your goals are to make sure that you're screening for the presence of alcohol, but you're not quite as concerned with the precise amount that you might see in, for instance, a whole blood test in a forensic lab.
Well, we result in terms of in the serum. We know the Massachusetts laws and laws across the nation are based on whole blood, but there are in the literature formulas that you can use if it were a medical legal case that one can use to convert our level to
which is exactly what they're going to do with the next witness. Use their data, convert it, do all the legal forensic stuff after.
Blood alcohol. We don't do it in a hospital. We won't report a serum alcohol, and then we don't do the conversion. But because it's a very rare event that a level will end up in court. But there are forensic lab people that can provide that formula.
And when you get a test result from a serum test, that information does not establish when alcohol was consumed, correct?
Correct.
And so you're just looking at a specific point in time to say this is what the serum test reflects at 9:08 a.m. on January 29th.
Correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. Mr. Wiley, any follow-up?
Just briefly.
So then we're going to jump to the next witness here. And right off the jump, the last comment that was just like, imagine coming in here just to sweat your butt off as a juror all summer and to think, well, did the judge really mean anything negative toward that last witness? Did she want the jury to, think that she was mad at the last witness or annoyed at the last witness when she had to turn the fans off? Well, let's hear how she starts right when this witness sits down.
Nothing but the truth, so help you God. Hey, you have a secret. I just need you to keep your voice up really loud. If you're too soft, we're going to turn off the air conditioning. Everyone's going to get mad. No problem.
So I'm not sure if you hear, it wasn't the judge. Sorry, it was the bailiff. He said, I'll back it up and play it slower so you guys can hear it because I don't want to misquote him.
Bring the case down here and true the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You can have a seat. I just need you to keep your voice up really loud. If you're too soft, we're going to turn off the air conditioning. Everyone's going to get mad.
If you're too soft, we're going to have to turn off the air conditioner and everyone is going to get mad at you. So what does that make you think about the last guy? Did everybody get mad at him? And if you're the Commonwealth, do you really want everybody in the courtroom, judges, lawyers, jurors getting mad at your witness? It's just not great, right? You want to try to avoid that if you can, especially if he's not doing it on purpose, right? He wasn't being a jerk. He wasn't avoiding questions. His voice just was a little too low. So that's tough. That's tough for me. Okay, so this guy I really love. I mean, this is a very interesting kind of expert. Shows up in just like his work polo, explains stuff in a way that I think is a little easier to understand. Didn't try to act like some kind of big shot. Explained it in a way that I thought the jury could answer it and use it and analyze it. But even better, when the defense attorney would ask a question where the answer is obviously yes, even if it's not good for the Commonwealth, guess what this guy did? He just said yes. He just said yes. He didn't try to argue. He didn't try to dance. He didn't try to qualify. He just said, yeah, sure. If you change everything, yeah, the answer would be different. Eric saying, he said it jokingly. I'm not saying he was being serious. Okay. I'm not saying he was being serious at all. Okay. I think it was a joke. Everybody laughed, I'm sure. But at the same time, I'm sure there were people in the courtroom that were annoyed with that last witness because he couldn't keep his voice up and they had to turn off the AC. And I'll tell you right now, the way adrenaline rushes happen in trial and everybody's working hard, overworked, I may say, including the jury, and then you start sweating on top of it or it's hot in the courtroom, you can get miserable fast in trial. I'll just tell you, you can get miserable fast. All right, let's jump to how he actually explains how the hospital does it, why they convert it, things like that.
What is it and how is it performed?
Sure. So with serum conversions, usually what happens is that we get hospital results. So that would be the police or the ADAs would get results from the hospitals that whoever was attended to. We get the results, and usually hospital alcohol results they use serum in order to test alcohol. Serum is essentially the liquid portion of blood. Let's say, for instance, you fall and you cut yourself, that red stuff that comes out, that has serum within it. What the hospital does, they centrifuge it or spin it very fast in order to get the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and all kinds of the heavier materials out of that blood. And what's left is the serum. So they use that to test their alcohol. What studies have shown is that we actually tend to have a higher alcohol concentration in serum than in blood. So that means is that due to the chemical nature of alcohol, it likes to stay in that liquid portion more than throughout the whole blood. So a serum conversion essentially is able to convert the alcohol content from that serum that we get from the hospital into what it would be in whole blood.
There you go. I mean, I thought that was a pretty simple explanation that we understand how the hospital does it, why they convert it, how it's a little higher when you deal with the serum versus the whole blood. Okay. Yeah. Candy. Same. Seriously. Same. And I think there's a lot of people like that.
Did you have occasion to perform a serum conversion in regard to Ms. Reed's medical records?
Yes.
Okay, First Witness.
Yes.
So I'm showing you a document just asking to review that.
Yes.
And what do you recognize that?
So this is the serum conversion report that I made with the calculations were made on May 3rd of 2022.
And as far as the result that you received, in addition, so what kind of materials did you receive in order to perform that analysis?
We got the medical records.
Okay, First Witness.
Yes.
I want to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1. Is that a portion of the medical records that you reviewed in regard to Ms. Reed's serum alcohol level?
Yes.
And if you could, what was reported in the medical records that you reviewed and using in your serum conversion analysis as far as the level?
The level was at 93 milligrams per deciliter.
And so with regard to that,
I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to where he explains it some more and explains how he converts it.
In your serum or plasma, that alcohol content would be higher as it would have been in the whole blood.
now, as far as the milligrams per deciliter, how that's reported in the Good Samaritan medical records referencing Ms. Reed that you reviewed in this case, is that typical as far as how hospitals would report sort of serum plasma levels?
Yeah, from my experience and all the times that I've seen serum conversions come through the lab, milligram per deciliters are the units that they use from the hospital. Yeah.
Now, as far as that 93 milligrams per deciliter, what, if anything, with regard to serum conversion, what, if anything, are you then able to do to convert that to a VAC or a blood alcohol concentration?
So based on some studies, they came up with a few different conversion factors, knowing that the blood alcohol content would be higher than the serum plasma content. They're able to apply different conversion factors to the numbers that we would get in serum. And we usually get, excuse me, we usually give a low, an average, and a high, being that it's kind of hard to say what one particular person's conversion factor would be between the two of them, since it's dependent upon like age, sex, the water content, what you had to eat that day. So it's harder to pinpoint. Therefore, we give a good range as what it could possibly be pertaining.
So some people have problems with ranges, period. Caitlin said, granted, it's been 15 years since my high school AP stats class, but doesn't the phrase retrograde extrapolation by definition imply reasonable doubt? Especially when you're talking about ranges and low, middle, high. I know he's doing the conversion from the serum / plasma to the whole blood, but he does the same thing when he does the extrapolation where you have a range. And by definition, he's saying it takes into account all these variables: height, age, gender, what you've had to eat or drink that day, medication, whatever. Maybe there's so many different variables, but scientifically we do these studies and we have these articles, and the literature tells us that, you know, whatever our state has to cross the border of, you know, Daubert or being a reliable scientific study, accepted in the community, peer reviewed, whatever it may be in the state that you're in, they're able to testify that it converts to this low, middle, and high. So let's listen to what the low, middle, and high is for 0.093 for the serum / plasma.
And just in case a person converts, or their conversion would be a lot lower or higher. So we give a good range.
As far as those different conversion factors, where do those come from?
It's based on some studies. I don't remember the actual names of the papers that were thing, but they were based on studies throughout the forensic world when it comes to looking
That's a
at.
funny answer. And like some lawyers be like, oh, you're going to say you relied on studies and you don't even know the name, or they could cross them and try to hammer him for that. But it's like, do the juries really care if you're like, the Scientific Institute of Technology in New York says, or the Institute of Scientific Blood Extrapolation in San Diego says? It's like, he's like, yeah, I read some articles. Here's what they said. So when it may matter is if he was, if the defense was trying to strike him as an expert, then it may matter and you dig into that. Does it matter in front of this jury? I don't know. You guys tell me. And some people don't know. And actually, some people wrote me messages to remind the crowd, especially people that are new here for the Karen Reed case. The point of this channel, and one of the things we love to do, is you guys are all potential jurors in the jurisdictions in which you live. So I'm a lawyer talking about the case, learning from you guys as jurors to see how you see the case. And as you guys read and listen to each other's comments, even if you disagree, hopefully respectfully, you can understand that there are other people that see it differently. And if other people are able to see it differently within this chat, there's a chance that people see it differently within that jury. So that's always interesting. And that's why I like to ask questions like that. Do you care? And Ann said, yes, I would care. So that's important, because lawyers usually would care. If a witness gave an answer like that, they wouldn't like it. Some jurors don't care. So that's why I'm asking. Ann would care. So let me know in the chat if you would care if he just said, yeah, there are some studies and articles.
Specifically testing blood and serum to find that conversion factor.
As far as those studies are concerned, they come from sort of different population bases. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's how they were able to get the range of conversion factors that they use.
Now, as far as the water within the serum, or sort of how that works with the centrifuge, what, if any, relationship does that have to the reading that you get or the conversion factors that you use?
So the water content, essentially, if the serum being the liquid portion of the blood, water is also liquid. It makes up some of that serum that you get from it. Therefore, your higher water content, more essentially, the lower the concentration could be of that, or lower or higher, depending upon whether or not your water content in that sample is lower or higher.
So as far as those different conversion factors that you're using, this is essentially a mathematical calculation. Is that right?
Yes.
And so the different conversion factors that you're using for the low, the average, and the high, what are those conversion factors?
The low is a 1.18, with the average being a 1.14, and then the high being a 1.12.
So based on your analysis, as far as the medical records, what was reported to you, using those three conversion factors, what, if anything, did you come up with as far as a low, an average, and a high for the 93 milligrams per deciliter?
All right. So here's the answer. All they said a lot of numbers and a lot of words there. Here is the low, middle, high for her blood alcohol content around 9 a.m. Okay.
So our values that were calculated for the low was a 0.078 gram percent. The high
So the low was 0.078. This is a low range given by the state's witness. What does 0.078 sound like to you? To me, it sounds like below the legal limit. I am not a proponent of taking one sip of alcohol and driving. Okay. Not a proponent of that. Most of you guys know I don't drink in the chat already, but it's not illegal to have a drink and drive. May not be wise. It may not be the best decision, but it's not illegal to have a drink and drive, to have a drink and still drive. But where are the legal limits? Well, the low limit here, even by the state's own calculations at 9 a.m., was below a 0.08. Okay, let's see what the mid was.
high was a 0.083 gram percent.
0.083 was the mid, which is the average, which is the most likely calculation if we're going to take it and we're using statistics, right? So it's 0.083, barely above the legal limit, still above, still illegal if she was to drive it at 9 a.m. Okay, we're going to get to the time difference here in a second, but just on the state's own evidence, the low is below the legal limit, the mid is barely above, and then what's the high?
With the average being a 0.081.
Oh, I'm sorry. The high was a 0.083. The mid was 0.081. So right around, even the high and mid are just barely above. Okay. So if you're a defense attorney and you're arguing all these other factors could be a problem, people can absolutely be on the fringes. There are issues with this case because we don't have all the variables checked off. And you're telling me, even with the testing you did, the best you can come up with is an average of 0.081? Bank that. Okay. Bank that information because we're going to hit all this after he explains the extrapolation. He explains how alcohol depresses the central nervous system for a few minutes. I want to skip that and then get to the extrapolation explained.
Side effects from having a central nervous system depressant in the body: lethargy, sleepiness, drowsiness, unable to walk properly. Any one of those tests that you see on TV from the police when they try to get your horizontal gaze and try to make sure you're coordinated, it can affect all those things.
So are you also familiar through your training and experience of working in forensic toxicology with a term known as retrograde extrapolation?
Yep.
And can you explain to the jury what you understand that term?
So a retrograde extrapolation is essentially another calculation, but it allows you to be able to calculate what the possible blood alcohol content would have been at a time prior to when the blood was drawn. Say, for instance, blood was drawn at 2, you could essentially figure out what the blood alcohol content would have been at 10 in the morning prior to it.
And that's done with the calculation as well, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, what are some of the types of information that you would need to know or that you would want to know in order to perform a retrograde extrapolation?
We need to know, one, for sure, what the alcohol content would have been. We also need to know the time that the blood was drawn, as well as the time of the last alcohol consumption.
Okay. So now we're starting to get into the important factors of how we extrapolate this. And to make extrapolation as simple as possible, it's basically trying to determine what somebody's blood alcohol content is at any period in time after they had a drink, right? Once you take it, the time that you take either blood or breath, and you get the answer, you can extrapolate it back and you can extrapolate it forward as well to when they're going to be back at a 0.00. And you just basically do it based on statistics and averages because every person is actually different. And if you were to guess, you'd probably never actually be right. If I pound a beer and I tell you to guess when it's going to be 2 hours from now, there might be a calculation, but you're probably going to be wrong. Even if you know all the factors and you can make it just about me. But how does my body metabolize food and, things like that? And just being, even like being Greek potentially affects that. All sorts of things, how healthy I am or how not healthy I am, how much I drink in the past, right? Certain things you can know, certain things you can't know. But that's what extrapolation is generally. Once you have a number in a point in time, you should be able to go back or forward and pretty much be able to give a reasonable scientific guess at what a person is at that time. Now, the major issue with this is what happened between 12:45 and 9 a.m. 12:45 and 9 a.m. So, Robert, I see you throwing numbers out, And I think you're actually low for what they say. So we're going to hold on and see what they say when they extrapolate it back to what Karen Reed was on the low, mid, and high side at 12:45 at night or in the morning, depending on how you look at it.
Now, in regard to timing, as far as what, if any, limitations are there in regard to performing retrograde extrapolation as it pertains to timing?
So when we do these calculations, anything that's shorter than 2 hours, we usually don't do that conversion.
And why is that?
Because we built in within our calculations, we allow for 2 hours. That has to do with the way that alcohol leaves the body. If the alcohol is still being absorbed by the body, we want to give it enough time to get to a point where it's coming out of the body as opposed to increasing in the body. So that 2 hours puts the person at a point in which that alcohol be coming out as opposed to it being absorbed.
So that right there, if she had a drink within 2 hours of 9 o'clock, would throw everything off, obviously. We don't know the answer. I'm not saying that. But that's basically what he's saying as far as this testing goes.
So there are essentially three different sort of phases as far as intake of the alcohol into the body through dissipation. Is that correct?
Yeah, we usually there's a well-known kind of metabolism route to which they alcohol metabolizes out of the body. Yes.
And so, can you describe to the jury sort of that metabolism process as far as how it starts to its end?
Sure. So with having, let's say, one drink, what the body begins to do at that point is absorb the alcohol. Usually you get like a steady line that increases with time. So if you think of a regular chart where you have the level of alcohol in the body versus time, which would be on the y-axis or the x-axis at the bottom, as time goes along, after your first drink, the body starts to absorb the alcohol. If that was your only drink and that was it, the body then at a certain point it stops absorbing it because there's no more to absorb and it plateaus. So essentially the line goes straight. After that point, the body starts to eliminate it at this point. And then your level or your concentration of alcohol within the body decreases with time as it's getting.
It's basically a bell curve, right? You start drinking, goes up, plateaus at some point, then goes down, as long as you don't keep drinking. And it can go up faster if you haven't eaten and you don't drink a lot. It can go down faster if you do drink a lot and you do eat or drink a lot of water, take some aspirin, whatever, liquid IV, whatever it may be. You can affect what happens to that bell curve.
Getting rid of it.
And so there's sort of the absorption phase, the plateau, and then the elimination phase. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that in the course of your analysis for retrograde extrapolation, it's important to know sort of when the last drink was. Is that right?
Yes.
Why is it?
That way we can get a good time in and figure out the amount of time that has passed between the last drink as well as the time that the blood was taken.
It's very important, obviously, because if you don't have the last drink, then their BAC is going to, or BA, blood alcohol content, is going to continue to go up, right? It's like, to make it easy, if you have a can of water and you put some ointment in there, it's going to be a little bit of it. You put more, there's more, you put more, you keep putting more. You're never going to know when it's actually full until it's done putting more in. Then if you start to sift it out, that's fine. It's sifting it out, even if you sift it out at a normal period of time. But if you put more in, then it's more to sift out. And if some has gone out, but you've added more in, now it's not exactly a straight line either way. So there's all sorts of factors. But there is a way this can be somewhat legitimate. And I will tell you, I've used these kind of experts in tons of DUI cases, mostly on the defense side, to go back and show what their BAC was at the time that they were actually driving. Because it doesn't matter what it is at the time they're at the hospital or at the police station. It matters what it was the time they were driving. So theoretically, you can pound 3 shots and go drive somewhere for 5 minutes, and your BAC is going to be below a 0.08. But by the time you get there 5 minutes later, it could start to go up and be above a 0.08 because it hasn't gone through your body and hasn't affected your central nervous system or your normal faculties, which is the language we use in Florida.
Now, did you perform a retrograde extrapolation analysis with regard to Ms. Reed's BAC or the converted BAC from the serum conversion?
I did.
And so with reference to Ms. Reed, as far as obviously the hospital records, you looked at the serum conversion report, what, if anything else, did you review or look at in coming to that retrograde extrapolation analysis?
We usually get a police incident report, and that usually identifies the time in which, per their narrative, what time in which they had the last drink.
May I approach the witness room?
Yes.
So again, presenting you with a document, if you could just look at that on the
For the subject of Karen Reed.
Now, with respect to the time that you utilized in that report, as far as when was the time that you utilized as far as the last drink or time of operation?
The time that was utilized as the last drink, it was at 12:45.
That'd be 12:45.
Her last drink was magically at 12:45. Okay. and here's where we get into some of the problems, in my opinion. I shouldn't have used the word magically. That was argumentative, right? Objection sustained. But how in the world is her last drink at 12:45? If that's when she hit John O'Keefe, okay, that's kind of what I thought the Commonwealth's timeline was, that she hit John O'Keefe at 12:45. Was she drinking in her car? Is there any evidence of that? If I were the Commonwealth, I would at least say 12:14 or whenever they left the waterfall, because at least that makes sense, as opposed to them driving around trying to get to the Albert's house and getting the directions and maybe going the wrong way, and then they end up parking and the car is moving up and back according to the Commonwealth's witnesses. But I just don't get the 12:45. Lisa brings up a good point. They say that she took the glass. Okay, is there going to be evidence she was drinking in the car, though? Was John holding the glass? How did the glass get in the yard? If Karen was drinking the glass, was Karen taking a sip of John's glass? I mean, the broken glass in the snow, I hope that's not what they're relying on to say that her last drink was at 12:45. I mean, because again, we can reach and we can try to figure stuff out here together and we can try to piece this puzzle together. But oh boy, is that not a good argument. That is just not a good argument. And again, we're looking at this, and a lot of the people I asked were specifically out of the eyes of a prosecutor. Okay. Multiple current and former prosecutors I asked about this, talk about this, because I want to make sure I wasn't crazy.
5 a.m., is that correct?
Correct.
And so you're using that to sort of extrapolate from 9:08 a.m. when the 93 milligram per deciliter is reported from Good Samaritan to 12:45 a.m., correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to that 12:45 a.m., what if any difference would it make if it were a little bit off of that? Say it was 12:30 a.m. or it was 1 or 1:10 a.m. What if any impact would that have on your conversion?
So we tend to go by hours. So we kind of round to the nearest, I think, 15-minute interval. So a couple minutes or 10 to 20 minutes forward or behind of that 12:45, it wouldn't change the results by a lot, if any.
So again, I get what the Commonwealth's trying to do. It's like, well, we may not be exact on that time. So up or down 15 minutes, no big deal, right? Yeah. But some jurors, I think, are going to be that and be like, so then what does matter? If you can just change the time up or down 15 minutes, if you can just throw all these factors out that come into play that might affect the blood alcohol content. So what does matter? There's going to be some jurors that are on that side. Cassidy, happens more than you think. More than you think.
And similar to the serum conversion, is this done with different conversion factors as far as a low, an average, and a high?
So we usually just calculate a minimum and a maximum for the retrograde, and that incorporates some conversions as well.
Now, as far as the minimum versus the maximum, what do each of those sort of signify, or how do you come to those mathematical calculations?
So with the minimum calculation, we incorporate the 2-hour period. So we assume that maybe at 12:45 wasn't the body wasn't at that point finished with the elimination. It wasn't in the elimination phase, so we allow it for 2 hours ahead of it. We also have a conversion factor.
If her last drink was at 12:45, the only way you can look at this bell curve is it was on the way up, right? If she's still consuming alcohol at 12:45, it's on the way up. Then it peaks at some point, plateaus, and then comes down. So it's definitely still going up at 12:45.
Again, this is a study that was done to see the elimination rate of different people within a population, what rate they would get alcohol out of their system per hour. So we applied the lower limit, which was a 0.1 gram % per hour with that 2-hour allotted time interval. And then we use a lower serum conversion number, the one that was converted on the lower end. We use all of that in the calculation in order to come up with the minimum. The maximum one uses the opposite. So it uses the higher converted serum conversion number with the higher elimination rate using the full amount of time.
And these calculations or these conversion factors are all based on sort of medical studies that you reviewed in literature that goes into your training?
Yeah, all of it was part of the training, and they came up with those numbers prior to even when I was hired there. But it is based on multiple different studies in that, looking at that elimination rate.
And so from your calculations when it came to the minimum with regards to the retrograde extrapolation, what if any calculation, what if any result did you come from with your calculations as it pertains to the minimum?
So the minimum amount that was calculated would have been a 0.135 gram %.
So the minimum that they think she would have been at 12:45 is 0.135. Almost twice the legal limit. Way too drunk to drive. Pretty drunk. 0.135. That's the minimum, though. So let's hear the mid and the max, more importantly.
And that's essentially reporting in a blood alcohol concentration, is that correct?
Correct.
And then with regard to the maximum, what if any result did you get from your mathematical calculations in regard to that?
The result was a 0.292 gram %.
.29. Let me know in the chat. How many of you guys have ever seen somebody with a .29? The highest I've ever had in a case when I was prosecuting a case was a third time DUI, .33. And this girl was like 5 foot nothing, 100 pounds. Third time DUI, .33. .29 is smashed. Smashed. More on that in a second.
And so that range that you receive is a bit of a wide range. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And why is that?
So we base those calculations, they're based on that conversion that I did from the hospital results from serum, giving us a good range of values in the first place. But then we incorporate the retrograde extrapolation one, which uses a time factor. And that 2-hour difference using two different elimination rates, that causes a wider span of values. And it's just so that it can encompass essentially anybody within the general population, that they would be somewhere in between that lower limit and that upper limit.
So essentially from those mathematical calculations,
Somewhere between a .13 and a .29. And the defense attorney is going to use that sarcastically in a way that I think does help illustrate it to the jury just how wide of a range that is.
anyone within sort of the general population with that result would be somewhere between the 0.13 and the 0.29, correct?
Correct.
And approach just to retrieve that.
Again, we're not going to tell you where Karen Reed is on that scale. Just the general population is between a 0.13 and a 0.29. It's like, okay, is that good enough? So I'm seeing some of you guys say 0.29, or you saw 0.301, 0.40, 0.6 in the ER. That's wild. 0.38. So you guys have seen some doozies, And those are all official numbers, right? We've all seen somebody we probably thought was a 0.29. Okay, so I'm going to take a second here before we get to cross. I'm going to answer some questions, of course, but I want to give you kind of my thought when I look at this witness. And there are a couple ways to look at it. So all those people that are going to be with me and rah the first half, just wait till I get to the second half. So for her to be at a 0.29, which is within their calculations, okay? A 0.29, and even the average is above a 0.20, right? If my math is correct, it's like a 0.21. That's pretty smashed. So if she's at a 0.21 at 12:45, when supposedly she's taking her last drink while driving, she's on the way up of the bell curve. You don't peak or go down while you're drinking. So she's going up. So the peak or the top of this bell curve is going to be above a 0.29, potentially, if it's at the higher end. So now she's even higher than that at some point in the night. And maybe people will say, yeah, that makes sense. She went home, she passed out, she freaked out, she blacked out, she forgot what happened. Okay, fine. Possible. But now, if it's 12:45, she's still drinking, she's at a 0.29. If you're going up or down in these hours, and you can go up a little bit, down a little bit, well, let's just take 30 minutes before, 12:15-ish, 12:10 to 12:15. Every single witness that we have seen on the stand that was at the waterfall that night with Karen Reed and was asked about her and John O'Keefe at 12:10 to 12:15, how were they acting? Did they seem drunk? Were they slurring their speech? Did you have any worry about them driving? Did you tell her not to drive home? Or did you actually encourage her to come with you? Meet us at 34 Fairview. Every single witness said she was fine. Now, could she have been at a 0.08 or a 0.093? Sure. You might think somebody's fine at a 0.093, but at a 0.29 or at a 0.25, I think it'd be very strange to think somebody's perfectly fine and nobody noticed anything. And I know there's a lot of comments. There's some questions I'm going to get to about how come nobody said anything about the McCabe's or the Alberts drinking and driving. They're not on trial here, okay? So I'm not going to try to figure out if they were driving drunk. They definitely seems like they were drinking and driving. I hate when anybody does that, but I'm not going to try to prove up a criminal case against them without a lot more information. But what I will say is every single one of them that went back to 34 Fairview, I believe, I shouldn't say every single one. I'm pretty sure all of them, if not all of them, the vast majority of them that went back to 34 Fairview, what did they do after 12:15, 12:30, 12:45? What did they do? They drank more. What did Higgins do when he got back to his house? He drank more. So all of them drank more, but Karen Reed for sure did not. Right? I don't know if they've proved her whereabouts for every minute between 12:45 and 5 a.m. or whenever she got up, or 12:15 and 12:45. I'm sorry, and 5 o'clock or whenever she got up. But are we sure she didn't drink anymore when everybody else did? I'm not saying she did or she didn't. The state has to prove this case. So, those are some of the issues. And I will just tell you, one of the most common cases we learn about and talk about, and we have actually had this case come up on the civil side, not on the criminal side, but there are cases where, and things you learn about in law school, where somebody gets into an accident, they've been drinking, they literally flee the accident site and start pounding beers, or literally opening a bottle of wine. Happened to me in a case where I represented the victim, and the defendant did not get charged with a DUI, and we were pissed off about it, obviously, because there should be punitive damages and all sorts of extra stuff. But when the cops showed up, he was sitting on the curb with an open bottle of wine, currently drinking it, and it was more than half gone. So if they were going to do a breath test or a blood test, they would never have been able to prove what he was while he was driving, because he was chugging that wine. And they didn't feel like they were going to be able to do it well enough to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So now let's go to the little poll that I did, current and former prosecutors. And I gave them I actually said 0.09 at 9 o'clock in the morning when she went to the hospital, 12:45 last drink. Extrapolation shows 2-ish, the high end being 0.29 at 12:45. But you don't know what she did between 12:45 and 9 a.m. Not a single one of them said they would prosecute that case. Not a single one of them said they would feel confident they can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, or that that's even enough evidence to prove what happened at 12:45. And there were some questions here. I know I started some, and it's going to be hard to. So Just Me asked, would you defend her in this DUI? I think this is an incredibly easy DUI to defend personally. If this, what we have right now, right? There could be more information coming, but just with these numbers and what we have right now. Laura, do people actually use this in trials? It seems like a real crapshoot. We use it all the time. But do you want to know when we use it? We use it in a situation where the cop follows our client, weaving in and out, or doing something, rolling a stop sign. Weaving in and out is actually a pretty good indication of drunk driving. Let's say rolling a stop sign, which people do every day, or changing lanes without a blinker. Cop pulls him over. Will you do the breath test? Yes. Take him to the station if they don't have a portable one. Does the breath test an hour later, blows a 0.09. We know that he has drank nothing in the last hour. If he testifies, or we have a receipt from a bar that he drank 3 drinks or 2 drinks 4 hours earlier, we can have an expert do a legitimate extrapolation from the minute he left the bar and paid for those drinks to 15 minutes later when he's in the car to an hour later when he's at the station, and we get the actual content, the blood alcohol levels or breath alcohol content, and they can extrapolate back, and it's a controlled time period and situation. And we know how big he is, how much he drinks normally, what medication he takes, all that stuff. And we can eliminate a lot of the factors that may make it erroneous or that may make it too wide of a range when it's close, when it's 0.09. Those are the best cases to do it at. That at the time he was driving, it was really more likely to be a 0.06, which is below the 0.08 legal limit. Those are the cases we use it in. Those are the cases it's successful sometimes. So when you have a 0.09 at 9 a.m. and not a lot of information between 12:45 and 9, and basically just the prosecutor's word for it at this point that that's the last time she was drinking, I'll just tell you, that is not enough. You got to have something more than that. Not to mention, usually you would like more than what they have to prove that she was even behind the wheel driving the car. And maybe more of that's coming. Okay, maybe more of that's coming. But right now, it's like I saw Karen's car. I saw a girl in the front seat and a boy in the passenger seat, or I'm sorry, a woman and a man. Long hair on the woman, short hair on the man with a hat on. One witness said that. Other witnesses said just a female in the driver's seat. So they don't even have a great wheel witness at this point. I would hate to prosecute. Now, there's a lot more. Obviously, there's a second-degree murder charge, manslaughter charge, but just talking DUI, it sucks. But here's when I'm going to lose all the people that are pounding the table with me right now. But I also heard a lot of people say this case is going to get, directed verdict, judgment of acquittal. Judge is going to throw it out because this is junk science and not enough evidence. Okay? And that is where we differ. If, in fact, these experts and this testimony passes the scientific reliability in Massachusetts, this is absolutely enough evidence for a reasonable juror to potentially find in a light most favorable to the Commonwealth for DUI, assuming they can prove that she was actually the one behind the wheel. But even if somebody throws this out, and it's hilarious to me because people that are in the two different camps that think absolutely she was plastered, this proves she was drunk. There is absolutely evidence now that she potentially was up to a 0.29 at 12:45 and should absolutely have not been driving. So therefore, drunk driving, DUI, at least that charge, locked and loaded. And they can't fathom how people on the other side say this is all junk science, BS, way too much going on, can't find it reliable. But the question for a judgment of acquittal is, can a reasonable juror find in favor of the state, basically, or the Commonwealth in a light most favorable to them? Helen is saying, no, it isn't. It legally is. This is legally sufficient evidence. Does that mean a jury's going to buy it? No. Does that mean it's going to be a guilty verdict? No, I'm not saying any of that. The bar is much, much lower for a JOA, for a judgment of acquittal. Much, much lower. So it's going to be tough with this evidence. And if they continue to bring this kind of evidence with experts, it's going to be tough to win a lot of this, or if any of this, I don't expect them to win any of it on a JOA. All right, let me answer some questions before we get to his cross. The only pass I have is to put on your live once the Phillies game ends. By the way, did you hear Charlie Adelson gang hit, transfer up north? I did hear it. I haven't had a chance to dig into it. Honestly, with Daybell and this case and then Scotty Scheffler, I literally haven't looked at anything else. I haven't looked at any other case, including Koberger and other cases we've been following for years. The Steph K. At Karen's height weight, it wouldn't take many drinks to be above the legal limit. Too bad they didn't test all the McAlberts. Yeah, and again, I don't think that really has a lot of relevance on whether or not she was driving drunk, right? Just because they may have been too. I don't think that has a lot of relevance to this case personally. Chronic Christie, question. What if a juror has an issue understanding an expert, not scientifically, but if a juror has a hard time with rate they talk, does a juror take whatever they can grasp? They're supposed to ask for clarification or to slow down or that they're not understanding, but most of the time, this is what happens. Yeah, they just get as much as they can. Hey, Peter, was her behavior at 6 a.m. consistent with drunkenness? She slept, shocked, in my opinion, no. I mean, I don't know. They're saying she was frantic, repeating herself. I think that's up for interpretation, right? Now, I don't remember. This would have been a good question for the McCabe's, the Alberts, Carrie Roberts, if the Commonwealth asked, did she drink anything from 5 o'clock to 9 a.m.? So we can at least block that time period out. So it's just we don't know between 12:45 and 5 a.m. I would have liked for them to have done that. I can't remember, though. If I would have heard this evidence first, I would have paid more attention to it. But they do have at least some witness testimony to that. Have you seen evidence that truly makes you actually believe in grand murder conspiracy so far? Murder conspiracy meaning from the Commonwealth witnesses? No. I haven't really seen enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a murder occurred. Mary, is the reason no one has mentioned all the drinking and driving of everyone is because potential charge for Karen and can't be mentioned? No, I don't think either side wants to push there because they don't want to make it seem like all their witnesses were drinking and driving. And I don't think the defense wants to act like everybody's drinking and driving. I think it's better for the defense for sure to act like nobody was drunk driving that night. Everyone drank and drove, should have all the BAC checked. It's tough after the fact, obviously. Tracy, with this case and their evidence collection process, I want to know everything. I agree. I think we should always want to know everything. Melly, I like this witness. I agree. I feel like the witness is there to present facts and not supporting a side. I agree. And I also think it comes in, it's even more apparent. I think now's maybe a good time to jump into Cross. He doesn't try to press. He really doesn't try to press. If she asks a good question, he's like, yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Retrograde extrapolation to reach your sort of opinions and conclusions in this case, correct?
Yeah, it was a calculation.
And that means that you rely on an assumption that a trend will continue beyond sort of observable data.
So metabolism is actually pretty well studied. So we know that that elimination rate, unless you introduce more alcohol into the system, it declines at that rate, and it's pretty linear.
Exactly. So in other words, certain assumptions are incredibly important for you to reach your analysis.
Sure.
And that includes sort of the timing of the very last drink that the individual had. Is that right?
Yes.
If your drinking pattern is sort of different than what you assumed for purposes of your calculation, then you'd agree that your entire extrapolation would be incorrect. Is that right?
Yes, it could be.
And again, those assumptions sort of included the time of the incident, right?
Yes.
And importantly, the time of the last drink.
So those two will be what we use. It's the time of the blood draw as well as the time of the incident or last drink.
And your report acknowledges the testing that was used to obtain ethanol results in this case was not performed by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab.
Correct.
And for that reason, the report and those results do not fall under your forensic lab accreditation standards.
Correct.
The Massachusetts
So again, less reliable than if they would have done it by their standards is what she's trying to get at there. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit.
with accuracy.
I'm not aware of any kind of test that would do that. So yeah.
Because individuals are different, right?
Yes.
And so the conversions that you use are based on averages from scientific studies.
Yes.
But you'd agree that in certain instances, people can fall outside of that average range.
Yeah.
In fact, a comparison of hospital serum alcohol levels, they range quite wildly. You agree with that?
Yeah.
In fact, you're aware that some studies show that a conversion rate from serum alcohol to blood alcohol can be as high as 1.59%.
I wasn't aware of those numbers, but yeah, it could range. That's why we give a wide range, and you could lie on the outskirts of either side.
And so that would mean that the actual blood alcohol content, once it goes through the conversion rate, would be much, much lower than sort of the average conversion rate that you relied on.
Yeah, it could be both higher and lower.
And that includes that range that you gave, right?
Yeah, it could fall outside the range.
You see how he just says yeah to most of her questions?
That's the more imprecise an extrapolation is, the less reliable it is.
Yeah, you do have to base it on good. Your starting blocks have to be good. So you have to know the times in which the blood was drawn, the time of the incident, and essentially what your value was for your BAC.
And the time
The starting blocks are important. He's right, 100% right, and the defense would agree with that.
of the last drink, you'd want to know that?
So we would put that around the time. Yeah, either the time of the last drink or the incident date.
And so the more sort of unknowns you're trying to account for, you'd agree the less reliable your end result is going to be.
It could be yes.
And you'd agree that sort of the range you gave in this case, which was 0.135 to 0.292, that's a very, very large disparity.
Yeah.
Almost a sort of 120% swing.
Yeah.
That would be the equivalent of, for example, predicting a child is going to grow somewhere from 6 feet to 14 feet.
Check.
Sustained.
It's a very large number. You agree with that?
Yeah, there's a large.
It's been a pretty big range, right? And scientifically speaking, doctors usually don't give ranges like that, right? And Steffi K, I think that that's what a lot of people would think that is possible. But again, we don't know, but whose burden is it to prove? And they have to prove it by the highest burden in America, beyond a reasonable doubt. Bailey, somebody's got to pay for that, right? Somebody's got to pay for it.
range, like I said, due to the factors involved in the calculation. That's how it gets so large.
And that's because you're acting with a lot of unknowns in this case.
Yes.
Now, you testified that your retrograde extrapolation assumes that Ms. Reed reached the elimination phase of processing alcohol at or before sort of 12:45 a.m.
Yeah, we allow for, we start for the maximum at the 12:45, and then it would have been 2:45 for the minimum.
And so for purposes of your calculation, if Ms. Reed drank alcohol after 12:45 a.m. and before her blood was drawn at 9:08 a.m., your entire calculation would be invalid.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the punchline for the defense, people. If she drank after 12:45 and before 9 a.m., all your calculations are wrong. And what did he do? Did he say, well, no, technically, if it was within 15 minutes of 12:45, like I said before, up or down, well, and if, like we said, there are other variables, so it could still be that high, even if she did drink after 12:40. No, he didn't try to do any of that. He said, yeah, they'd all be wrong, because that's true. And I based it off science and numbers. So you want to know what I believe? I believe this guy's calculations were correct. I believe this guy did his job appropriately. And I believe that if the Commonwealth can prove that she didn't drink between 12:45 and 9 a.m., that this guy's testimony locks in the fact that she was, above a 0.12, 0.21 at 12:45. If the Commonwealth can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. Netwoman says Kevin O'Leary, aka Mr. Wonderful's wife, was charged in Canada for a boating DUI that killed 2 people. The judge threw out her blood alcohol content or breath alcohol content because she was already home and didn't know when she consumed alcohol. Thanks for your dedication. Thank you, Netwoman, for the super chat and for hanging with us. And what I will say is there are some states, I believe South Carolina either is one or was one, that if you don't take the blood within 2 hours of the incident, then you can't use it. What do you think about that, right? We have a state, or states at least in the past, that it's so unreliable to get something 9 hours from now, which, by the way, all the state attorneys I talked to were like, ugh, that would be the literal worst. Especially since we know that she didn't go to sleep at 12:45. If obviously she was hitting somebody in the front yard. And I know people are throwing out their different timelines and Ring doorbell cameras and stuff. I mean, this is what the Commonwealth gave them. And David Reese, I'm saving one of your comments to play for when we get to recross.
So in this instance, Mr. Roberts, you're dealing with the time of incident
This is redirect now.
that was known, correct?
Yes, it was given to me that it was at 12:45.
And as far as the BAC or the serum conversion,
Given to me.
Mr. Roberts, you're dealing with the time of incident that was known, correct?
Yes, it was given to me that it was at 12:45.
And as far as the BAC or the serum conversion that was coming from a medical record, so that was known as well at 9 or 8 in the morning.
The time that the blood was drawn, yeah, that was known as well.
Now, as far as the question you were just asked, if the defendant drank alcohol after 12:45, does that include sort of shortly after 12:45, or how long after 12:45 would it take in order to affect your calculations or your retrograde travel?
It's hard to say where that would have skewed it. It would have definitely caused a different time frame, depending on how long after the incident or the reported last drink. If there was another drink in between there, it just shortened up the amount of time that would have been prior to the blood draw for sure.
What I'm asking is, would it have any significant impact, or would there be any difference if the last drink was, say, at 1 a.m. versus 5 a.m.?
So that'd be a 4-hour difference. So essentially, that could.
I kind of feel like Lally is trying to ask a question where he's like, no, up or down a little bit is okay. But this guy's like, yeah, if she had a drink at 5 a.m., that would be a big difference. That's 4 hours later.
Given the conversion rates, that would put the numbers very different. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, so the 5 a.m. would significantly impact your calculations, correct?
Yes.
1 a.m., would that significantly impact your calculations?
No.
There you go. I think that's what he was going for. But this witness, again, is listening, thinking, and answering correctly and appropriately and honestly.
You all set, Ms. Little?
If I could just ask one question. You said that you were given 12:45 as the time that you sort of based your analysis on. And
Yes.
to be clear, that was not something that was provided to you by my client, right?
No.
That was something that was provided to you from a police report.
Correct.
No further questions.
Okay.
So will we hear Karen Reed testify? Because now we're starting to get information that she could affect. And if she testifies and said, yeah, I went home and had 3 more glasses of vodka and passed out, that changes that throws out all this evidence. And the state might not know whether or not she's going to say that, because she's exercising her right to remain silent at this point. Could absolutely change the evidence and testimony in this case. Okay, next witness is Michael Trotter. So that's basically the DUI stuff. And I think I hit pretty much everything I wanted to hit at that point. If there are more questions, I will answer them. But we're going to get to the superintendent of public works for Canton. Proctor reached out to him. They got the plow plans. He doesn't really remember Proctor asking very many questions. We're going to jump right into cross. This witness was pretty quick. We're going to jump right into cross to see, if Proctor did his job or not in interviewing this witness.
Not me, no.
And he never asked to interview any of your employees, correct?
We may have discussed who was on that route and who plowed, but I'm not sure at that time if he had told me he was going to go talk to anybody else.
Oh, so it's your testimony that you may have told him the identity of the plow driver when you spoke with him on February 3rd over the phone.
I may have, but I am not positive.
You don't have a memory of him asking you who the plow driver was?
He asked, no, I don't have a memory of his exact questions.
But leaving aside the exact wording of his questions, it's fair to say you don't have a memory of him asking you who plowed Fairview Road on January 29th. Is that fair to say?
He asked me about, I believe he asked me about this plow list,
About the what? The plow list?
this plow list.
Right, but on the plow list, there's the name by the yard, correct?
Yes,
All right. There's also, to the left of that, an indication of the name of the plow driver, and it's just a first name and a last initial,
Yes.
correct?
yes,
It doesn't spell out the whole last name, does it?
no,
But you know the full last name, correct?
Yes.
You have a limited number of employees, right? It's not a 1,000-person company, right?
yes,
All right. And you're well familiar that Brian L. is Brian Laughlin, right?
yes.
As you sit here today, do you have any memory of whether the name Brian Laughlin was brought up during that phone call with Michael Proctor?
I may have said to him, that's who BL was, but I did refer, I believe I referred him to the operations manager to double check who was on plowing that day.
Okay. You say you may have mentioned the name Brian L. or Brian Laughlin, but again, I'm just trying to drill down on what your memory is. Do you have a memory one way or the other as to whether the name Brian Laughlin came up in that conversation?
If you are asking me, do I remember 100%? No.
Okay. In any case, Trooper Proctor, Michael Proctor, never asked to speak with Brian Laughlin when he talked to you over the phone,
He
correct?
did not ask me, no.
I'm going to allow the question and answer.
And how short was that phone call with Michael Proctor?
If I tell you, you're going to ask me, how do I know for sure? I would
Okay.
say
Again, I like this guy too.
a few minutes, whatever a few minutes is.
I'm going to accept that answer. And you would agree with me that after, and by the way, you were trying to be helpful, correct?
Yes,
After that couple of 3-minute phone conversation, you'll agree with me that Michael Proctor never followed up again with you personally.
that's a good question. I am not sure.
Okay. Well, I'd like to direct your attention to about a week and a half later, specifically the date of February 14th of 2022, which maybe you don't remember the precise date, but around that time period, you came into work around that time period, and you learned that a defense investigator named Paul Mikowski had left his business card for you with somebody on the DPW staff, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. Ask it differently.
I do not,
Sir, that means you
Oh.
don't answer that question. I think he's going to ask one that's appropriate with you to answer. Okay.
Do you recall when you came into work receiving a business card from Paul Mikowski?
no.
Do you recall calling Paul Mikowski back?
Again, I also believe this guy because he doesn't even remember the interaction was to the defense. But the point is, Proctor did not go and try to find the plow driver that drove that night. Seems like the defense is going to call him. We'll hear if Proctor ever reached out to him, if Proctor ever interviewed him, and what he has to say and whether or not it's important, right? But the defense is opening questions in the jurors' minds about what's coming next and whether or not Proctor, of course, did his job. Next, we get the Canton IT guy for the finance department. He was notified the police was looking for some video footage, 12 to 1 a.m. and 5 to 6 a.m., set to record on motion. I heard some rumblings. There's parts missing. But let's kind of get into, first off, how Lally tries to set the foundation for this disc, which was not great for him. And then what the defense wanted to get at in cross.
That video from the Canton Public Library, you've seen that video subsequently, is that correct?
This disc with the wording on it?
Yes.
Hold on, let me back it up a little.
So I'm showing you this, just ask you to, as far as that video from the Canton Public Library, you've seen that video subsequently, is that correct?
This disc with the wording on it?
Yes.
No, I have not seen this.
Not that specific disc, I'm sorry. So, but the footage, have you been shown that particular video footage, or did you review that footage before you gave it to the troopers?
This is not mine to the trooper.
Okay.
So first off, if the defense is going to argue there are parts missing, then you have the guy being like, this disc, I've never seen this disc. Number one. And number two, when they're like, you've reviewed that footage, right? It's like, no, I didn't actually review that footage. And it's like, okay, Your Honor, can we have a sidebar? And when they come back, the judge is like, all parties agree that this is the next exhibit coming into evidence. And it's like, yeesh, that's not great for the Commonwealth.
Be the next exhibit.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So you both agree that this will be the next exhibit?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that's the sidebar.
So that's it. After this guy's like, no, I've never seen this, didn't review it on this. And Andrea, this could absolutely be the case that they just transferred it onto this disc, which is fine. But I'll just tell you, usually what we do is We show a witness the disc, say, hey, can you look at it? Make sure it's the same as what you gave us so that you can confirm it on the stand that this is the disc you gave. They didn't do that. My guess is the defense has reviewed it, and so that's why it's okay coming in as an exhibit without an objection, but not great.
Sure, sorry. All right, so the parties agree that this is the next exhibit, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, Your Honor.
Thanks.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would just ask to briefly, publish portions from those
Hold on. Yeah.
first video.
This is the view that it shows.
Mr. Jutras, what's up on the screen? What's up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
And as far as the view from this camera this is from the library, is that correct?
Correct.
And so as far as what we're looking at here, this is the view from the camera as you observed it on the security camera and as you provided it, correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, sir, you have is there a laser pointer up on the desk in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with this area as far as the area of camp?
Yes, yes. Town Hall is right across the street.
I'm sorry, I stepped right over your words when you were saying that.
Yeah, so Town Hall is right across the street, and the intersection here is at Sherman, and this is Washington along the street that you'll see.
So Washington sort of runs parallel with the street, and then Sherman is the street that appears to intersect with Washington
Correct.
in the area of town.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So if you could take that down and just let that apply to this. And yes, sir, what's up on the screen? Do you recognize that?
Yes.
This is essentially the video that you provided to the troopers or retrieved from the Canton Town Library from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. later on that day, January 20th.
Yes, sir.
And the orientation as far as Washington Street, Sherman Street, that's all the same in reference to the earlier. The camera has moved.
Correct.
Thank you. Take that.
All right. So that's basically it. We'll see how all those dots are connected more later. Did the parties agree at sidebar because of authentication? Probably. And probably the defense reviewed that disc and was fine with what was on it. That would be my guess. But again, we didn't hear what happened at sidebar. Peggy said, did you know that the head selectman for Canton lived directly across from the Alberts? His Ring doorbell didn't record for 45 minutes that night. Coincidence? Yikes. That's not great. That's not great. Tracy, can the Commonwealth avoid calling Proctor? I don't see how. But I will say, if they don't, it will make me think back to a lot of the questions Lally asked, which was, Proctor wasn't alone, right? Somebody else was there too. And they would mention this trooper or this officer or somebody else that was there with Proctor. So are they going to call all those other law enforcement officers to testify to all of those interviews and interactions so that they don't have to call Proctor and it doesn't matter because they can still connect all the dots? I don't think that's a good idea. I don't see how that works out well for them. I think the defense would call Proctor if they did that anyways. But in addition to that, will they call all those people to try and bolster Proctor? Call all those people first and then Proctor to confirm with what all those other law enforcement officers said? I don't know. But to me, very interesting. Doug said, not Reed related. Are you going to do a video on Koberger hearing from last week? It was mad, weird, and confusing. So I'm not, only because I will eventually watch it, but because it was one witness in a line of witnesses that I think will have a better understanding of what's going on when they have the full big hearing. So I will be breaking down the info, but not just in that individual hearing that we saw. Julie, do you or your dad have any thoughts about why the feds haven't intervened? Do you think they will? I know clearly speculation, just curious on your thoughts. I mean, I could go a million different ways with this. Maybe they're seeing how it plays out. Maybe they're seeing if she's convicted or not convicted. They're going to base some part of their decision on that. Maybe they're seeing how some of the witnesses testify under oath in this case. Maybe they're seeing what the prosecutor's office does. I don't know is the true answer. My guess is they're watching. Okay, let's jump in now to Cross.
Confirming the state police, when they contacted you, asked for 2 hours of video footage, right? Between 12 and 1 a.m. on January 29th and between 5 and 6 a.m. on January 29th, correct?
Yes, sir.
You pulled that video footage, or at least arranged for it to be pulled for the state police, correct?
Yes.
And I believe your testimony was that you checked the beginning time and the ending time to make sure that you had the right time periods for those 2 hours, correct?
Yes.
But you did not sit down and watch 1 hour of snow falling and or cars driving by the public library, correct?
That is correct.
Did
I
you
did
do that for between 12 and 1 or between 5 and 6?
Correct. I did not.
And at the time that you provided the video footage to the state police, did you know whether or not there was any missing footage within those 2 hours?
No. Because again, I did not play every single second of the video.
Understood. It's fair to say, and you're certain, that you did not cut out any of the video footage in those 2 time periods, correct?
Correct. It's motion activated. That's the only piece.
You provided.
So there are some arguments I hear out there that motion activated. If nothing went by, maybe it didn't record for those couple minutes that some people are saying is deleted. I'm waiting to see how the arguments actually come out. It definitely seems like each side is pointing to some stuff with this video, but I really need to wait and see how they actually present it. Mary asked if Proctor could plead the fifth. Yeah. If he thinks it's a potentially incriminating statement, he could. Make sure you guys hit the like button if you haven't already. Almost 10,000 here in the chat. And the last couple of videos have got 10,000 likes. So hit that like button and we'll keep pumping out the Karen Reed content.
State Police with the raw footage as it existed in your possession at that time, correct?
Yes,
And at that time, you knew that the raw footage was only saved for between 30 and 60 days?
that one is less than 30, yes.
Right. Now, as of early February, when you were dealing with the state police, you knew that Karen Reed had been arrested and charged in court, correct?
I do not recall if I had that information.
You knew that there had been a police officer found dead on the lawn of another police officer in Canton?
At that time in February, I believe so.
And that likely would have been discussed when the state police called you?
I do not recall the conversation other than asking for video footage for Washington Street.
And I'm sorry, sir, if you could just keep if I can't hear you, I guarantee you that these last jurors can't hear you. Could you just repeat that last question?
Yep, again, when in the conversation with it, we had the dates and the timeframes, and anything else relative to it, I do not recall specifically the conversation.
So you don't have a memory of why you were being asked for this?
Correct. I know it was for a motor vehicle accident. Who and what, I do not recall if that was ever mentioned specifically.
Okay. And you would agree with me that as the IT director, you had the ability, if you wanted to download the footage onto some hard drive to preserve it, if you wanted to do that?
Yes.
Did any state trooper ever ask?
We could have preserved it, which is important, especially with missing parts. And Jess said, that's nuts to me. There's footage missing, but the guy can't confirm or deny if the footage is missing because Proctor moved it to a CD. Can't make this stuff up. So here's what I'll say. We'll see if there's any evidence or even argument that it was deleted or Proctor screwed it up or something happened. Right now, we don't know. And while that lack of evidence or inconsistent piece of evidence can create reasonable doubt, we don't know that anything nefarious happened yet. So I don't think we can really assume that. It might be taking it kind of a step far. Now, if you guys know stuff that I don't know that's going to come out later, fine. But I'm waiting to see what actually comes out through evidence in the case.
You to download and preserve that footage so that it would exist longer than that 30 to 60 day period?
No.
And so it's fair to say you did not do that, correct?
Correct.
You complied with what?
But why didn't they? I mean, they didn't ask anybody to preserve anything in this case, which again, does that mean a cover up? Maybe, but more likely what it shows me is a horrible investigation. None of the witnesses did you download their cell phones, or potential third-party culprits or other people you may have wanted to investigate didn't download any of their cell phones, didn't even tell them to preserve it, actually fought so they didn't have to preserve it so they could get rid of it. And then also didn't tell this guy to preserve the original data. Why not? Cop lost his life, right? It's hard for me to figure that out. Steven said, I admit, I haven't watched the whole trial so far, but I'm not convinced the Commonwealth has proven Karen Reed was driving drunk. From what I've seen, they haven't convinced me of anything beyond a reasonable doubt.
They asked you to do.
Yes.
Now, skipping ahead to April 6th of 2023, you were contacted by Michael Proctor, a state trooper investigating this matter, correct?
I do not recall.
Do you recall Michael Proctor asking you to provide to the defense in this case the same raw footage you had previously provided to the state police?
No.
And you don't recall telling him that you couldn't do that because after 30 to 60 days, footage is gone, correct?
I had a phone call with what I thought was Trooper Dunn asking for another copy of the data and telling him that I did not have it and I couldn't recreate it.
I see. Oh, so you
If it was,
By
if
the
it
time they were going to give it to the defense, oh, oopsie, can't do it.
was Proctor, but no, I thought I was speaking with Trooper Dunn.
Trooper Dunn was the name that you remembered from February.
Correct. That was the first interaction I had.
And when they mentioned state police, you assumed it was the same state police trooper, correct?
Yes.
It's fair to say that once you shared the footage with the state police in February of 2022, you didn't control what they did with it after that, correct?
Correct.
And you have no personal knowledge about how they preserved it or didn't preserve it, correct?
I'll allow it. Do you have any idea?
No.
And one last question. You cannot testify about whether any video was removed from the footage after you provided it, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
So that didn't really come in. That was just a question that was objected to and sustained. And that's it. Okay. That's it for this guy. So that's going to be it. I'm going to answer a couple more questions that are kind of off topic, but I appreciate you guys for joining me. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't and hit the like button before you leave. We're going to be back live at 5:00 p.m. Eastern. I've got a couple appointments between 3 and 5 o'clock, but we're going to talk Scotty Scheffler. I saw a lot of you commenting in the chat. I have a lot of thoughts and I still have some problems with what happened and how it ended. So come check that out. Melissa said, headed to Tampa. Any place you recommend? I love Colombia, Cuban food. If you need like a nice steak, there's Burns, Ocean Prime, Eddie V's, stuff like that. Trying to think, a lot of stuff at like International Mall is good. There's so many great places. Robin, Peter, love your shirt. Can I ask the brand? I think it's Abercrombie. My wife got it for me. I told her I wanted some of those like sweater shirt things. So you're going to be seeing more of these coming because she got me a couple of them. Saucy Sarah, off topic. Any chance you'd cover the Jamie Lee Komorowski case? I don't know what this is. I got to be honest. Kind of what I just said. I'm covering so much right now in detail with Daybell and this and Scotty Scheffler maybe coming to an end, but there's just so much. I'm not sure I can jump on that one. Azam, yes, hit the like and subscribe if you haven't already. It's all we got. You guys are the best, as always. I appreciate all the comments and the questions. We're going to continue to follow the case. We're going to continue to answer your questions and break it down and see what we find. Last one here, Amy Z. I knew if they knew Proctor was going to plead the fifth, how can they put him on? Thinking of Crumbly judge and how she wouldn't let him take the stand if it would be automatic mistrial. So I'm not saying he would plead the fifth to everything, but if a question pops up that he's like, I got to plead the fifth, you can't just put him up there to just plead the fifth the whole time. Actually, in certain different jurisdictions, it's handled differently. So I don't know. That hasn't come out yet. So we will see. Mark E. Very funny. I said that was the last one, but very funny. This was good. All right. Yes, Tracy. Yes, that's rough. All right. I got to go. Till next time. Peace out. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.